So actually, first, can you guys hear me in the back without the microphone? Okay, so you guys are all, because I really don't like handheld mics. No offense to anyone who brought it in. Well, that's, we could do that later. So I'm going to talk about, well, my involvement the last couple of years in trying to help get automation and kind of the mistakes that we're making or that we're going through this process of transitioning from Waterfall to Agile, right? So I came aboard just after they stopped doing this, right? So I think all day everyone's been talking about Waterfall and it's going through. So about the time that I joined, right, they had just finished an Agile training. They had brought in a lot of consultants to walk through the Agile process, go through all sorts of, do's and don'ts. And when I joined, that was where they were focused on, right? So when I came on board, I was from another company that was also going through the Agile process. So when I came on here, I made a joke to all my new hires that came after me, right? Is get used to it. We're going to, let the developers develop for 2 weeks, and then they'll throw it over the wall to testing. And in a way, they were happy in the fact that we had a cadence, right? Every month we were releasing something out. And, it's actually, I wish I had done a whiteboard, because I usually do a whiteboard joke about this, but I drew this as fast as I could. It's a little different. But basically what my teams were experiencing at the time when I was in QA was we would do some development for 2 weeks. So basically what happened was the QA teams wouldn't even start on the project until 2 weeks after a project started, right? Or we might be in like the week before. And so they would call this week iteration 0, sprint 0 would just be almost all dev. And then maybe a couple days before they would inform the QA teams what was being built. And we go in and start this little process, right? And what happens was we would release, I should have put latest on here, but like the first set of stories that were in development on the end of that sprint A, and then continue on that pattern. Let's see. All right. So of course, like I said, we basically went down this little channel of goes to development, goes to testing, and it goes to release. So in actuality, the release cycle was actually 4 weeks back then. I just didn't feel like changing, just copy and paste over, but it was 4 weeks. So around probably the third month or so I was there, right? Everyone was screaming, yeah, we're Agile, we're Agile. And I sat there going, I just came from another place that was deploying software every month and actually making sales. So different world, and the product there was nothing by the time we were actually finished release number 1. So being the new guy, it's kind of hard not to, I couldn't question, or I was tasked, hired on as a senior QA engineer, I think at the time. So when we look back with a couple of folks, we did kind of a retrospect. Well, the teams before were happy the fact that they were showing something at the end of every month versus waiting until 9 months later to show they were happy. What was interesting, which doesn't show very well here, but I don't know, how many other people have gone through this where all of a sudden when you leave it to the teams, they created dev stories and QA stories? Okay, right, I can see a few, right? All right, so and I'll be honest, it's actually still the culture today in a lot of the project teams, but that was there. But our biggest problem actually at the time was we really didn't know what was going into the code. All right, Jira or Mingle, or there was a third tool at the time, all said stuff was going in, but we couldn't really tie it to our code base, right? So the very first thing we did was, well, we already had CI, but we just added a little script, right? Just track the stories, right? So we just put some standards, let me see this, right? On how we named our branches, named our stories, so we can actually track it to something. Now we were a little better off, right? Because now we knew what was coming in. Unfortunately, I wish I had some screenshots from back then, but this is Git. But back then, we were using Subversion. And with our CI systems back then, if something broke, we could only narrow it down to like 20 people. So, we were still starting it out. So, 20 people who broke the bill would get an email, and then we all had to hop into Campfire because our automated scripts would say, please go to this Campfire room, and then this little Hue bot would just go, okay, you guys, and if we aren't all in the room, we get another email. It's a little bit nicer now with Git, right? You broke it, we know you broke it. You know, you can't argue it. So that was fairly easy. So real quick retrospect, right? Everyone was happy. We now knew what was actually going into our code. We knew which stories were going in. And what else do we know? And again, for most upper management, for most folks, life was happy. They really should have this. Yellow. So again, stories were moving along fine, but you know, being early adopters, trying to figure out how things work. We had snags. We, you know, infrastructure, Jenkins, test even, just kind of slowed things down. That soon became our big bottleneck, I think. At least while I was dealing with a production issue earlier out in the halls, I think that's kind of becoming a common theme I heard today. If I knew that, I would have brought a different deck, which I do for testing. But that became our biggest bottleneck. However, and everything was still waterfall. So on the dev side, which I was also really kind of part of as well, we comment on it. So we started to focus on automation. So about the time I joined, we brought in a consulting company to kind of help build out a framework to start automated test. And I think pretty much everyone, well, I think most people are using Selenium to hit all the browsers. And so that was kind of where we started with. We wrote a few functional tests. We did the basic design patterns. Any QA folks here before I don't want to start ripping on QA people or I mean, I've been doing QA for 15 years, but I've worn many hats. So, you know, so we went through our own little issues. Historically, I knew there was a previous team that tried to do automation with an HP tool, and you know, that crumbled on its own weight. We actually started very slow. We just one test. As long as that was happy for a week, we added a second test. Went for another week, right? And so by the end of the first month, we only had 30 test cases running for one of our major applications in the merchant system. But we were happy to say that at least those 30 test cases handled, you know, basic functionality, and yeah, things were working fine, right? Next month, we decided, okay, let's just get some more people. Let's go train some people and start adding test cases in. And, you know, lo and behold, we actually kind of shortened our little development time. Right now, we actually had testing happening the same iteration or sprint as the actual development. But we still had that wall. Because we were still early on, and at the time, I think it was a resourcing problem more. Half the QA that we brought on board couldn't write automated test cases until the code was actually delivered. And I think more on my mistake was more of a resourcing problem. I had gone for the original POC with asking for those who could do it before, but then when it comes budgetary times, you don't have exactly the same thing. So I personally had 5 guys who could do it before, but there were 30 now who had to wait till code got delivered. So so mistake 1, make sure you keep the resourcing the same or start adjusting expectations. All right. So eventually what happened over time as we started going through this, many of the projects kind of ended up doing this. They would do development, then they would do manual testing, and then they'd hand it over to like either, you know, to one of my 5 guys to just go automate the next iteration. Or what we eventually ended up doing was kind of building a support team that's only job was to automate all test cases that were finished from all the test cases written by the manual testers in every project, and kind of put into a backlog for the automation. Like we actually had an automation team and their whole job was write test cases, check it into Subversion back then, and then just watch it and make sure it runs in Jenkins. All right. So, I mean, I think like by month 8, I think that the charts was about 1,000 test cases running in regression, fairly well. I'll have to admit, I was actually kind of happy, even though I would have liked more. But there were 1,000 solid test cases, and I think when I switched to a different group within Macy's, 992 were almost always passing. Almost all the failures were actual real defects. So for that team, we were actually pretty happy. All right, and then again, I just said, right, I would have, 8 months, I would have liked a little bit more than 1,000, but it's again, I only had 5 people who could write that fast, and we had a lot more project-based teams that were more focused on delivering the features than to make sure that after you deliver, we had sustainability. And so that created actually a really big divide between the teams. When I became lead, that became my biggest headache versus actually focusing on the technology was, from a QA perspective, some teams did not want any automation engineer for fear of losing their job. I think that's also a very common theme. What is our next slide? All right. So anyhow, things were kind of moving along, and kind of everyone just, they were happy. Stories were finishing. We were doing a release every month, and the only people making noise were my 5 guys sitting here getting the backlog of every other test case coming into them. But at that time, we had a different problem going on. Because now we were going a little faster, we had this 4-week release cycle where things were just starting to get really out of sync. As I said, we deliver stories every 2 weeks, and so somewhere in this cycle, some new stories, because of business need, get tossed into it, and all of a sudden we had to redo the testing for lack of better knowledge. So, not that we really like to do it, but we started implementing story branches, feature branches to help keep teams understanding what was going on. Most of us weren't really fans of it because it meant that you would keep that branch alive too long. For most of us, for my team, we kept our branches no more than a day. But organizationally, the branches stayed the entire iteration. So that was our biggest mistake. I'll be honest, we still do that today. But we've built we're constantly building automations to kind of protect ourselves from ourselves. All right, so we started getting a little crazy. We started building gate measures within Jenkins. Jenkins, in my mind, is really just to build and run tests and push it someplace. We started this process of, okay, now it's our control mechanism for everything coming in. So we started writing a lot of jobs. Every time we found an issue or something wrong in the process, we go off and write a Jenkins job, give permission to like 5 people who had the right to do it, and we started moving stories within the CI system so people knew where stories were at. All right, so here we have a backlog automation story goes in. And eventually, it starts to get really, really big, very fast, because we start putting stop measures almost every way through, right? So it was semi-automated, but this became a problem because someone like me would have to go log in, sign in, go look at the story, and then just push a button, and then we'd go on to the next one so another person can do their review and push through the button. I mean, the nice part, though, was things were kind of really moving fast. This was a snapshot from last year. We were actually only had 4 stories, but for the most part, we were happy with this kind of gating system that we can actually track everything through and managing to finish fairly close to every story done. In this case, I'll say this right now, for this team, it was kind of a cheat. This is more infrastructure architecture and application versus actual enhancements. So it's a little bit faster for these guys to go and, upgrade to the latest version of JBoss, do some quick testing, and move through. But we had the gating systems that kept us in check with everyone else. So, a year and a half later, we built this guy. We live by this guy today, but we have built, actually just a little more gates now, but we have built an entire gating system that tracks every story along the pipeline. So, from a technical perspective, I'm working on a story, I check it into Git, or into GitLab. GitLab has a set of rules. It validates against Jira, or depending on which team you're on, either goes to Jira, Mingle, or version 1. Right, so you can see the problem, right? Code maintenance, right? The system now goes to has to check all 3 different tools to find out whether your story is actually active or should be developed or so on. So, right, so that's kind of where we're at today. And then we go and validate. So in this case, luckily for this group, when we first built it for our team, it was just Jira. But as we started adopting elsewhere, we had to write code for Mingle, and we had to write end of last year, version 1 was added into the mix. And we did story validation. Our first version, we just went to go see if there was a valid story. Right? And so that was our first mistake because I think we were rushing through it. And so anyone else do validation with their code by just putting a story and number in their system? Or I know a couple other companies do, but so mistake one, if you do this approach, I kept the story number for myself that I knew was valid. So if I needed to check something in fast, I didn't want to go into the planning tools because I wouldn't remember which planning tool I had to go into, type in a quick story, and get it through the little process. I kept a unique story number back then that was mine. And then every check-in I did for those quick emergency patches was all, I want to say it was like something 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and then the next person on my team would go, oh, I need to get this quick fix in. I said, oh, just use this number, it'll get you through the system. Right, so that was probably our biggest mistake, was not really doing much more validation other than a valid story number. But we continued on. We have code coverage tools. We've got Selenium running, and then we do like a couple more checks within CI. This I'll explain. Some people probably after a stage 1 test, we kind of had like this 2 approach, and this is to handle manual testing. So when the project teams approved it, it would push it into a different environment for the automation team or other teams to go look at it before it would go through approve. And in some cases, it was weird because I know for one story I was really confused. When we pushed the lead approval button, we also gave the automated test cases as part of the source code, but it took a week before the other team pushed the button and said, it's good to go. So forecast, that second button is going to be gone hopefully by this summertime. Right? It's just going to go through. And then eventually we go off and into the RE world where from the dev or project teams we have no visibility into. It just goes off, and the only time we ever get called back is when we have to do a patch. Oh, ignore that confidential, do not distribute. That's actually, it's actually not very confidential. It's actually in a couple other books. We just changed it with our label. So anyway, I saw someone take a picture, so don't worry about it. Not too much. And if I could tell you like the 3 other books that have something very similar to it. Okay, so we built all this automation to keep our CI systems in check, but we were still stuck with this bigger problem. Development in most project teams, we're still doing something like this or the previous model. Right? I only have like 2 or 3 teams myself that have a much different picture of Agile today than what most of the other project teams I work with. So we did a record. We could track stories, right? Everyone's happy. We know where our stories are. We know which, when we're done. Some teams started kind of playing around. Some were kind of just finishing and pushing it away when they were done after the 2nd or 3rd day and forgetting about it and forgetting the whole process of you have to wait, whatever that was, until the end of 2 weeks to hand that over to another team. And so they would start to overload the other team because they would just go through the story so fast that when it went to another team for handoff, it was too much workload for them. But again, it kind of just morphed itself out as some teams had, I would say, better resources or, scope their stories very small, and so the amount of work coming through was quite a lot, and this handoff process. So kind of because of that problem, we had an even bigger problem. Let's see if this is the next picture here. It's not. The 4-week release cycle. Because we were doing so many patches, we were kind of making the mistake of making sure the patch that we applied went down the pipeline to all the future releases. And so we were constantly, every so often missing, oh, we patched it for 1.1, but 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 didn't have it. And then it would break, and then we'd have to go through this whole process. So we made the mistake. We did what we did best. We wrote another Jenkins job. Actually, we wrote 4 Jenkins jobs. So you can see we have that whole approval process of, there's a committee that says this code should go in. We actually got a little smarter. We'd actually tie it to another ticketing system to validate that the story that said to fix it, plus the story that was the ticket that approved, if they matched, again, just by number, they match, CI will actually push it through. The one smart thing we did was the release branch field had to equal the release branch field on what it was approved on. So at least we got a little smarter on that one. And if they didn't match, Jenkins would just say, no, can't do it. All right, so we barely, at that point, once we put that in, very rarely did we miss a story or a patch that went in to every other release moving forward. We did realize there were going to be certain stories that weren't going to go into future releases, but I think it was, we have like a 5-day mechanism. If you don't approve the story, we destroy it from the list. So that big list that you saw earlier, if you didn't approve it in 5 days, you had to go through the whole process all over again. So we did put some timing measures into that. Cool. Now, the big picture, right? We're now managing. We're not making mistakes. You know, our entire system is moving the code along. We're finally getting through all this, and everyone's kind of happy. All right, cool. We were actually tracking a lot more stuff than we were 2 years ago. I really wish I'd been the projector, but we were able to track everything through releases. So we have delivery managers who could literally look into Jenkins and go, these stories are going into the next release. They would, you know, run it by the business, and they would at least be able to foretell about a month ahead or so what was coming in, and everyone's happy. I know, a lot of, you know. So I came back to that team 8 months ago. I asked that question: what's the issues? Why did you want me to come back and move on to this one? I was in another project team at that time. I figured it out after my first, I think my first or second meeting with my new team. Let's see what's next slide here. I got all that. So when I came back to that group, I had 2 developers and I think 10 QA engineers who basically all we did was fix, well, bug fixes, automated test cases that were breaking, and the 2 developers were supposed to deliver new features. All right, so we were not in a very good spot. All right, why did this slide appear again? Sorry. Technical debt. Not sure why that's going through. Okay, so I took my 2 developers and go, okay, why did we get stuck in this situation? And not knowing why I was there to try to figure out what was going on. Oh, I know why. These are out of order. Okay. We were supposed to go investigate this guy. All right. In this whole release process, the only thing that seemed, well, we found out after watching a release, kind of sitting on the sidelines watching, the only thing that was moving very fast and very efficiently were the patches. All right. We watched, you know, we watched the story go through all the way through, and then it goes to production, and we tracked it after production to see how many bugs were opened against it. So, you know, and what we discovered was most teams weren't tracking after they delivered, right? Because we had a separate team to take care of it. And so we had a fix-it team. So that's when we realized, the 3 of us go, oh, there's something here. Right? We need to fix Jenkins. We need to rewrite stuff, but somehow the patches go through, and they make it to production, and they're solid. All right? And so we looked, you know, we kind of looked at the team that was doing it. It was like 3 guys, and we kind of came up with this. So we spent between July and November building this guy. And it's hard to see from here, but I'll walk through it a little bit. But so at most retail or e-commerce, you have a window of, during the holidays, you don't deploy to production. All right, it's just, you don't do it. So we realized, oh, if we can come up with something just by that time, we can do whatever we want, it will never get to production. So we played around. We improved a lot of our infrastructure. We basically, so I'll walk through the workflow and how we went through it. So if I checked in a feature, it would build me an entire, it would build me a complete environment. I wasn't tied to a QA environment anymore. I wasn't tied to any of our standard, you have to go to this environment, you have to go to this environment, you have to go. Based on how I configured or how I checked in my stuff, it built the environment I needed to do my testing. Something that changed was we actually executed the acceptance criteria tests, and they were automated first. All right, most of our current system before that would always run build acceptance tests. You must pass these tests. Well, for my team, and now then we were actually between the months of June and July, crying foul because all the code that we touched had nothing to do with the build acceptance test, and those tests would fail. And we're like, we didn't touch any code there, and I can prove it to you, back to the CI. And basically, we go through this process of telling CI to disable the build acceptance test when we checked in. So we changed that. I repurposed the team. I made the developers write the automated tests as well. And if you checked in and you had no automated test that we could find within the repo, we actually didn't even bother building. We'd actually reject it and say, nope, because what am I building for? So now the system forced us to actually write automated test cases first. And it didn't have to be the Selenium test cases. It just had to be a test case that we all agreed to. So a lot of it was, we write, so I know one story really well. We wrote 15 Selenium test cases just to see what would happen. Checked in the code, 15 test cases passed. We also realized we wrote 30 unit test cases that could easily replace the other 8 that we wrote through Selenium. Okay, so we did a lot of reshuffling, and basically for the acceptance criteria, 7 test cases were through Selenium, and we had 30 unit level test cases from the database layer on down was now part of it, right? But the system didn't care because of our annotations, how we coded it. It picked all test cases and executed. After that, based on what happened to us before, we started redoing our test cases. So we did something where if my unit test case was actually in this test class, at this second stage here, where it says execute targeted regression, would actually execute the test cases that the test classes came from, or the test classes that the individual test cases that came from the acceptance criteria. So it was a little quick shell script that found out which test classes it was, kept it in a list, and then through Maven, executed every one of those test classes later. So now we had a second stage of tests that were targeted at our actual fix. Right, so, and then we would check it in, and once a day we agreed that we'd just run everything. All right. Great, and we would deploy to a fake production environment, seeing as how we were DevOps now and combined, and we can build any VM we wanted, and so we would just deploy constantly every day, and we'd actually every now and then tell the business, hey, check out this environment. This is a feature we built for you. What do you think? And almost always signed off on it, right? So January comes, we're allowed to go back to the normal process. Notice there is no testing, there is no more dev. So a few of our teams now do full development going in. However, we still have this other side, the release engineering regression. But at least from the development teams, we're kind of happy. So far, today doesn't count, but prior to today, everything going into this cycle here has not caused any kind of issues found by any other team. So, that was a 3-month effort of just prototyping with a lot of the scripts to get us to that point. So, here we are. As of today, we're still in this process. Water Scrum Fall. So we still do this planning that takes place between January and May. We still have a whole separate team that takes care of the release. But for some reason, they don't, even though we sign off on it, they have a second team that verifies that everything we do. At the moment, we're not going to, we're not going to do anything about it. What we have started doing is we have started delivering faster. Because of this POC, and with all the gate measures we have in place, we are challenging the organization to handle releases every 2 weeks. We're not doing very well right now from a process perspective. All right. But we have teams that are focused on full delivery. One of the things that happened was we actually have performance engineers embedded in there now to take care of any other issues that would have happened in the later cycles. And then, as much as I didn't want to, I embedded my own engineers into other projects. who had either lived through it or had the right skills, had the right skills to actually implement the pipeline. Only thing we realized was the 5 or 6 guys that was on the prototype were like super happy, and had to tell them after this was all over, no, we're going to be stuck having to change everyone else through it. And we had to understand story points were going to drop if we turned it on. So even though we built this nice system that allowed a small team to go through and deliver basically stories every 2 or 3 days, we actually never actually turned it on. Because the backlash back to the 6 guys would probably be a little bit too much right now until we can change the culture. Oh, wow, time. So we're going after other problems. One of the things we noticed, and I'm going to ask this question. When I joined 3 years ago, we did estimations based on time. Everyone else do that? Yeah. Right. So you can imagine when I was surprised it was based on time and not complexity. And pretty soon, myself or anyone else on my team, our answer to everything was 13, because 13 equaled 2 weeks for us. How long is it going to take you? 2 weeks. Oh, 13. All right. Pretty soon, our project manager and Scrum Master just stopped asking us. Right. These guys say 13, 13, 13. Right. Right. We were trying to get the point across. The other thing was, I flew out to another group early last year, and they asked me to do all the estimates for the project, and I said it wasn't fair. And they asked why, and I basically said, well, I just did a quick demonstration over lunch, and I automated the entire test suite, and they said they want to rewrite it right in front of them. So I was like, okay. At that point, I had guessed it would be 8 times whatever I estimated in terms of time. Kind of laughing because I was just guessing a number. It's actually right. There's been 8 times against everything I've said. In terms of time, and I didn't understand that group system of time to points. All right. The other part was, again, with the estimations. That first group of folks I had, they thought it was a great idea to break them up and move them into other parts of the organization, not understanding that I had handpicked that team because of the dynamics together versus them as an individual contributor. Unfortunately, I hate to say, almost every one of them has left. After about a year. I left as well a year and a half after they broke up the band and came back. So this is our current thing that we're trying to solve. Just because, at the moment, like I said, we're not in the mood to go tackle the release engineering world. So I'll share with you guys something that we have been trying to figure out is how do we track better tracking of our story points. One of the things I noticed, and a few of my other guys have noticed, is we don't ever look back at the history. We never look at, I said this took, whatever, this one here. This was 3 points, but if I actually paid attention to what happened to an equivalent thing, that was actually a 8, right? But that was a year ago. I didn't know, and it was before I joined. If I had known this kind of information, I probably would have estimated differently. This one took us way too long to finish, but we were all new, or relatively new to this project, and no history. But when we look back now, when we look at the performance tuning component with the keyword SMF, we realize everyone else who had to go through this estimated a lot higher than we did, a lot higher, all right? So we kind of right now, at this point where we need to come up with some kind of system that goes against our components within our tracking system, and actually who the individual contributors who actually worked on the story, and whatever that point is. So that is kind of where we're at. Just giving you an idea, this is kind of how we're just kind of putting all the data, taking it all out of Jira, Mingle, version 1, and just trying to figure out if there's a way to aggregate it so we can get a little smarter on it. And then, so I was hoping that we'd have something to demo today, but we haven't finished it, but I'll post it out later if we got this working. You can see we're in this example here. Jessica is in here a few times, and based on the components, we might be able to start tying people with similar patterns, usage, and see if that actually holds out. And that's our theory. So our roadmap for automating our Agile process. The big picture is, I don't ever want to log back into the tools. I'm a developer. I'm going to check it in, and I'll let whoever wants to go look at it move along through the system. All right. 2 months ago, we had to build something really fast, myself and my boss, which was fun to watch my boss code because he's a director. We had to build a connector between all those tools, and we had 2 weeks to do it. Found a really quick tool that tracked. You'll notice I say that closes number 7. It would actually move all the stuff over for me, and so we were going to build on that concept. And that's kind of the board it was before I went on vacation. Almost, at least everything from in progress to close is all controlled by CI, either my commit, and if it passed, pushed automatically over. Oops. All right. Because we can actually start to do a little more stuff, which is what we have working. We can actually enforce messages. One of the things that we're trying to stop is people changing the story in the middle of the iteration, rewriting the acceptance criteria, things like that. We detect it. We can actually throw a message back because through the APIs. Again, we're hoping to start providing predictability to the organization when they request certain things. It goes through. And if Macy's will let me, which they have so far with most of my open source code, this thing should be available with, obviously, with the tools that we're currently working with right now. And then with stuff that my team is just using because, just trying something different to see where our pain points are. So we'll eventually have a lot of this automation out online. I'll probably tweet it back once we finish it and get it all approved. But that's currently where we are in automating the entire Agile process for us. And like I said, the end goal is I never log into a tool. I just do my work and let it go through. So, all right. Yes, questions? And now you can ask any technical questions or challenges. Okay, good. I know.
So you were talking about how sometimes it would take you longer than your team had estimated to do stories or shorter. Have you ever gone back and repointed the stories after you completed them? Like, how did that go?
So just for the mic, the question was after we made the wrong estimation, have we ever gone back to look at it? We have on a few occasions. We have one story that has taken us actually 3 months to finish. So we've actually spent 2 weeks, last week reviewing how did we think we could have done it in 2 weeks when it actually has taken us 3 months. Because I've heard this theme all day, we were relying on the QA automated test cases from our regression team to help us along the way. I had been on vacation on other activities to find out that my team was struggling with those automated test cases. And then in the last sprint, I said, stop it and just do this all manually, and we finished it. I mean, it was, so from that perspective, we realized when I fly back, I'm going to make that decision to my management, say we're not going to rely on these test cases anymore. And I still have to figure out what that consequence is going to be from a delivery for our team. But we have, for this particular case, because it was just drastically wrong, 3 months versus 2 weeks. But most of the other ones, we missed by a day or two. And we don't do those a lot because we realize we tend to forget the release engineering process.
I work in a highly regulatory environment, and we have some of the same situations you're going on with the mixed bag, because at the end there has to be a quality check.
Yes.
My thing is that how do you automate your test cases, and you have to have a certain time stamp or a certain regulatory, I guess, templates and things you have to follow.
Yeah.
Have you ever?
I have actually. I have. Yeah. So the question is, how do I deal with testing or automation from a regulatory standpoint? So prior to joining Macy's, I was part of Metadata Solutions, which is a EDC system for clinical trials. So I can tell you how we solve that problem. For us, we changed our SOPs. I mean, because the question, because honestly, in that case, we changed, so SOPs are standard operating procedures. We just changed it to adapt to how we were actually doing it and then explained it to the auditors. Second, we actually started using Cucumber to describe the features, because it actually has a little, when you run the automation, it actually puts a timestamp at the very, you know, depending on which format you put it puts a timestamp, and how we built it back then, you could tie it to the source code and you can literally click and find every single change. So that's how we got around it when I was at Metadata. But again, you can, I have some of that code if you're curious. I can show you how that works.
Okay. Other questions?
Okay.
Okay, well, Mel, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.